All right, welcome to another episode of TLDR. In this video, we're going to be talking about Angular, current version 5 point something. If it's 6 or 7 in the near future, most of this stuff is backwards compatible. You don't have to worry about any of that. But we're going to be talking about Angular, what it is, what it does, and then we're also going to be introducing you to the important parts of it. So, what is Angular, right? Well, Angular is one of basically two main JavaScript front-end frameworks. There's React and there's Angular. Angular referring to Angular 2 and above, right? Angular JS is typically Angular 1. Anyhow, there's also Vue, which is another up-and-coming JavaScript library framework. There's a bunch of JavaScript frameworks, but there's really two main ones that are dominating the market at this point in time, and that's Angular and React. We're going to be talking about Angular 5 currently, the current iteration, oftentimes just referred to as Angular. So why use Angular? Well, same reason you use any framework. You want to Angular, a framework is supposed to, in theory, allow you to write cleaner code that is more efficient at sometimes has better security, and also already has some resources there to make your life a little bit easier, as well as make your code more readable. So framework also gives us a lot of ability to manipulate the DOM, which is something in vanilla JavaScript it's a little bit harder than it needs to be. And so that's really why front-end frameworks exist, so that we can create code that is easy to read, that has enhanced functionality, that it involves quicker development, that may allow us additional features, as well as security and authentication. And Angular is pretty good at all that. So what are we going to be covering? Well, we're going to be covering Angular's major parts. Angular, any framework, is massive in scope, and I just got done taking a 25-hour Angular course not too long ago, and we're gonna cover in this 1 hour or so all the major parts that you absolutely have to know, and that's going to be components. Those are our reusable parts. Those are our reusable classes. We're going to be covering modules. This is where we essentially create a list of all the parts that we want to use and inject it into things. We're going to be covering services. How do we do AJAX calls, and how do we share functions between multiple components, between our reusable parts? That's what services are for. And then we're going to be talking about pipes. How do we format and display data in the UI without actually augmenting the data? And that's what pipes are for, and they're very helpful. I found myself really creating pipes left and right now. I absolutely love them. And we're going to be talking about routing, how to I need to edit this, but this is not, that little bullet point is incorrect. So how to actually showcase certain things in a route. So we want to, when our route changes, Angular and all these frameworks are called single page applications. You never actually load the page, but you do have, routes where, if my route is this, please display this component, please display this view, please display this item to showcase. And so we're going to show you how to do that in routing. Let's go ahead and dive right in. Now, I know you're the type of person who wants to learn. You want to learn today, as they say, and you're going to learn Angular today, and that's a great start. And if you're thinking about going to another level, taking your education to that next level, might I recommend Dev Mountain Coding Bootcamp, where they have 4 different locations. And you're saying, well, what if it's not in my 4? Well, Dev Mountain offers housing with their tuition, so you can get up and go today and get started. So check them out at devmountain.com. Alright, there's some things that we're going to need to install before we get started when we want to develop an Angular application. One thing is you're going to have text editor. The one that I'll be using for this video and the one that I recommend, just because I'm a big fan of it, is Visual Studio Code. If you go to code.visualstudio.com, download it, install it, you'll be good to go. Another thing that I'll be using is a Git terminal, and you can go to git-scm.com to not only install Git on your computer, but also get the Git bash terminal, which you'll see in a second. One other thing that you'll need to make sure you have installed is Node as well. If you go to nodejs.org/en/ or just go to nodejs.org, and I'm sure they'll have your language as well. and you'll be able to download the latest. You don't need to get the current. You can just get the recommended one for most viewers. I'm not going to walk you through how to install that. It's pretty straightforward. You download the file, you keep clicking next, and it's installed. And last but not least, we're going to install the Angular CLI. What is the Angular CLI? This is the Angular command line interface, and what this allows us to do is get a Angular environment set up and running very quickly in a short amount of time. And pretty much every time I start a new project, I install the latest version of Angular CLI. So if you want, we can go ahead and walk it through this part, just because I think it's a little bit more so, although there's instructions. So I'm going to launch my git bash terminal, and if you have git installed at this point in time, and then you right click, you'll see git bash. This will launch it just on the desktop. We're going to install this globally, which means that we're going to have access to it anywhere in our application. And all we're going to do here is npm install -g, that's that global, at Angular/CLI. There we go. Make that a little bit bigger for everybody. This will take just a second, so if it's taking a minute, don't sweat it. All right, so after you get done installing, you'll see some stuff like this. Everything will be good to go. Looks like at the time of this video, the Angular CLI is in version 1.7.4. Now what we need to do is wherever we're going to go and create our Angular application, in my case, I have a TLDR folder that I'm going to go to. You're going to go to that folder, TLDR, and launch your git bash there. We're going to be using this command here, ng-new, and this is going to allow us to create a new Angular application, and all we have to do is then name our app, and I'm going to just go ahead and call it TLDR Angular. And this is the Angular CLI is going to automatically create a working Angular environment for us to get started with. It's going to be pretty straightforward. We'll walk through a little bit more of what's inside the application when this gets done installing, and what you need to know about it when we get up and running here. All right, so let's go ahead and open our text editor of choice. Again, I'm using Visual Studio Code, and what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and open that file that just got created, this folder that just got created, and we're going to see a ton of crap in here, and a lot of it we're not going to worry about, but I'm going to give you a quick rundown of what's going on here. So you'll see this tslint, tsconfig. This is going to be to give us some styling suggestions, as well as Angular is written in TypeScript. We're not going to talk too much about TypeScript in this application. I'll have a separate TLDR video I'll be doing on TypeScript, and then we have our README file for some information about how to run our application, and then we have our Angular CLI.json. This is some of the setup here. So if you need to import a global style sheet or anything like that, you can do that here. If you need to import a global scripts tag, you can do that here as well. You can see the name of our application as well. And then these are our node modules, all the installs that come along with Angular, and some end-to-end testing. So couple more things. Let's see. So this is our global style sheet, the styles.css. So if we want to apply styles globally to our Angular application, we could do it here, and you don't need to worry about that. And then at index.html, you'll see we have this app root. This is our index.html is exactly what you would expect. We have a title here for our main homepage, and then our app root allows us to this is what's injecting at some point we have to inject our components into here. So that's what's going on here. Don't worry too much about that for the time being. And then assets, don't need to worry about that. Then app. Okay. I could have spent a lot more time, talking about this, but really all this sort of stuff isn't important. We have our package.json where this has our installs. At the time of this video, it's apparently installing 5.2.9 specifically. Of things in Angular, just for that, so you know, and our dependencies and all that sort of stuff. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about a component and actually get this up and running so we could see what comes by default with the Angular CLI project. All right, so let's go ahead and launch the default Angular project, which we've made no changes to quite yet. You'll notice that I'm actually now in the folder, the root folder, TLDR Angular that we created. All we have to do here is put ng-serve, and what this is going to do is it's going to launch our development server. The Angular CLI creates a nice little project for us where by default, if we go to localhost 4200, we'll go here. We have a wonderful little environment. This is what it's going to look like by default when we get started with an Angular project. It has some links to the CLI documentation, the Angular blog, etc., etc., and then the Tours of Heroes example. Now, one thing to keep in mind is the development server is really great so that if we made a change to our application like so, and we wanted to change welcome to app, for instance, to welcome, hello to app, and we saved it, the Angular CLI project that's set up automatically refreshes it so that, we don't have to go and click refresh. Every time we save and make a change in our application, it's going to do that for us. All right, so what we're going to be doing for our application is we're going to be building a survey form, and then we're going to have some services connected to it, but that's going to cover everything that I want us to talk about. So before we move forward, let's actually gut out this HTML file. You'll see here that this is just the stuff that we already looked at. This isn't going to be helpful to us. We're going to go ahead and gut that out. But let's talk about how each one of these components, you'll see this component keyword. This basically lets us know what this is, right? And there's a definite file name convention that goes along with this. But this .html, that's going to be our view. The .css, that's of course going to be our style sheets. One thing to keep in mind with Angular style sheets, by default, if we have a CSS folder or a style sheet in our component level like this, it's actually going to only apply, even if we create a name, an ID, it's only going to apply it directly to the component here. It's the styles for this specific component. You'll notice this spec.ts file. We don't need to worry anything about this right now. All this is some Karma and Jasmine unit testing. I'll have a separate TLDR video going over specifically Karma and Jasmine and how to get going. If you're interested in testing specifically with Angular, I have my part 2 course. We write a ton of tests. We're building a cryptocurrency front-end application using a cryptocurrency API, and it dives deep into that if you're really interested in that. So then we have our app component and app module. We'll come back to app module in just a second, but this app component, now remember I told you this is how we build our reusable parts. You'll see that we're importing component from @Angular core. All we're doing here is importing this dependency. All right, so let's talk about this decorator here and what this basically is, this @component. So you'll see that we have a selector, a template URL, and a style URL. When you're defining a component, there's 3 main pieces. The selector, remember in our index.html, where we, where are you, index.html, where we have this app root. This is our selector. So the selector allows us to inject the other components into a template, into a view, and then use it and render it. The template URL here is the HTML content that's in there. And now remember, we're going to be connecting the component logic to the template, but in our case we had just the Angular hello, welcome to Angular, and the 3 links, right? We deleted all that and got rid of that. The styles URL, this is an array. You can have multiple style sheets in here if you want, but this allows us to have custom CSS for our component. All right, so before moving on, let's talk a little bit about modules, what they are and what they do. Modules give us the ability to, at the end of the day, allow us to import a group of items and install them into our application. Basically say, hey, declarations are going to take in your components, imports are going to take in other modules that are going to be used, and then providers are going to take in services, and Bootstrap are components that will be automatically added when this all launches and runs. don't really worry about. These three main ones here are the ones you have to worry about for the extent of this video and just get up and running. So declarations, you add components. Imports, you add modules. Providers, you add services. We don't have any services yet, but modules at the end of the day really are just a way to add dependencies to your application, whether they're external or internal that you've created to your Angular application. The reason you might use modules is not only to organize your code better, but also to sometimes, as applications get more and more complex, you may only want to load a third of your code unless they get to a certain route in your code, and then you'll load the other 2/3, and so your application will run a little bit faster, things like that. So that's modules, and as we go and create components, we'll be jumping back in here to add some stuff. So let's get started by creating, in our first app component here, we're gonna go ahead and create a heading and a title, and we'll get started creating our survey form. One more thing before we get started, I'm going to actually install Bootstrap. This is just going to be for some styling and CSS. You don't really have to worry about it too much more than that. So to do that, all we have to do is make sure you're in your root directory, and then go npm install Bootstrap. And this will take just a second to install. Alright, after it goes ahead and installs, you'll see something like this. Bootstrap's currently in version 4.0 right now, and what we have to do next, we just have to add the dependency. Even though it's added to our application, we have to add it to one of two places. The Angular CLI.json, we could add it to the styles here. I personally like to instead just use an import statement in our global styles. Say @import, and then this tilde will essentially hit the root of the node modules, and then we'll say bootstrap /dist/css/bootstrap.min.css. This is going to give us access to Bootstrap to use as we're building out our components now. Alright, so our survey form is going to be about cryptocurrencies. Mainly because I already have some cryptocurrency APIs I'm familiar with. You don't have to know anything about cryptocurrencies for this tutorial. So what we're going to be doing here is we're just going to start off by creating a little container. This is just some Bootstrap, and if you're curious how I shorthanded this, built into Visual Studio Code basically has a emit plugin in the background, which allows us to type div and then classes like so, with the dot or the hashtag for ID, and hit tab, and then it will allow us to, when we hit tab, it's going to create that for us. So we're going to go ahead and create this div container class. Then we're going to create a h1 here. We just put a crypto survey in it. Go ahead and save it. All right, and then of course we need to restart our server, which we haven't done yet. So let's just go ahead and do ng serve real quick. That's going to launch as well. All right, it's back up. Alright, rather than switching between screens and all that sort of stuff, I'm just going to put the screen in the bottom left corner, and every once in a while I might pull it in for major milestones of the video, like towards the end. You'll see here we have our crypto survey. It's H1. If we wanted to, we could add a class, text-center, just to center it, make it look a little nice. So, nothing crazy so far. Now, what we want to do here is we're going to have three parts, three inputs. Maybe a name, a drop down, like an input, a drop down, and then a comment. So 3 inputs. But I actually want to create a new component to do that. So, and then also include views. For the first, to start off, what we're going to do is we're just going to create the component. We're using the Angular CLI. Alright, so to get the Angular CLI to generate a component for you, all we have to do is ng generate component, and then the name of the component. In our case, we're going to call it crypto-form. And this will automatically create the component for us. Wham bam, go ahead and lower this, jump back into our application, and you'll see we have this crypto form component now that has been generated in our application. So what gets generated with it? Well, we get a CSS file, we get an HTML file. It's just going to have some text in here so that you can see that it displays. We're going to get this testing file, then we're going to get our natural component here that basically everything's said about with the constructor and ng on init. We'll talk a little bit about what that is and how we're going to use that moving forward. So one other thing that happens in our app module, you'll see here, it automatically will import our crypto form component and add it to our declarations using the Angular CLI. So we don't have to worry about that if we're using the Angular CLI. But now that we have our component created, how do we add a component to another application? Well, it's pretty straightforward, right? We saw how we did with app component. So how would crypto form component do it? Well, let's look at our selector here. We have app-crypto-form. Go ahead and copy that. And we go ahead and jump right into our app component.html. Put that, hit tab, save it, and we should see the text that was in there, and we do, where it says crypto form works, right? Or you see that there's something there very small if you're watching this on mobile. All right, very nice. Let's go ahead and delete that. And now we're just going to create our form real quick. So we'll do a div, we'll make it a row, and then we'll create a div call. Oh, excuse me. I'm sick while filming this, so I apologize if I'm sneezing. So we'll go ahead and create a call md-6. We'll put a label in here. This will be with like font-weight-bold to make the label there, and this will be for what was this? We'll do name, and then in here we'll have our name, and then we'll have an input. This is going to have a class of form control. All this stuff is basically just basic HTML and a little bit of Bootstrap, so it looks nice. And we're going to give this an ID equal to name, so when we click on the label, it goes in there. And we'll go ahead and create another. We'll save that real quick. So that should give us a little label and a little form control. Nice. Let's click name, go in there. Cool. Let's go ahead and create another div real quick. And then we'll, this will be div.call-md-6, another label, font-weight-bold. We'll call this for, this is going to be a drop down of some cryptocurrencies, and we'll just call this cryptos, and we'll say favorite crypto. And then we're going to create a drop down. So we'll have our select tag, and this will be, we can get rid of the name here. We don't need that, but we do need ID here for cryptos. And then we're going to go ahead and create an option, and we're going to iterate through that in just a second. So one more thing that we need to create for our HTML, let's spread that out a little. Oops, let's spread that out a little bit so it looks all right. And of course, I meant to add class here equal to form-control. This will just make it look nicer. All right, and while we're at it, we don't need to have this in its own row. We'll just have a text input div.row div.call-md-12, and we can just go ahead and put a label.font-weight-bold. This will be for comments. And then we'll say comments, and then we'll have a text area dot font dash weight dash bold. All right, delete all this other crap. All right, cool. So basically, we just did a little bit of Bootstrap, a little bit of. Oh, this is form control, excuse me. So form-control, a little bit of misspelling. So we basically created a little bit of HTML here. Looks clean. It's nothing super crazy. And then let's go ahead and create a button. We'll just do div.row, and in here we'll have a we'll just make it. Oh, it doesn't matter. We'll make it a button, and we'll say dot btn btn dash outline dash success. Oh, and also let's just make it block level button, and then here we'll just say send form, something like that. All right. Oh, it's not gonna look right if we don't do this. This will do it so everything's on the same page. All right, cool. And maybe we'll add a little bit of padding to the top, or margin to the top. So MT-2, just a Bootstrap margin class. Very nice. All right, cool. So pretty basic. So we've created our component. We're not using routes yet. We're not going to worry about that. But let's actually, and we haven't done any logic in our component yet. We'll come back to that in a second. But let's go ahead and actually create a service, because we want to populate this drop down here with a list of cryptocurrencies. So how do we go and create a service? All right, before we move forward, let's look at the endpoint that we're going to be getting our data from. We'll be getting it from https://api.coinmarketcap.com/v1/ticker. And if you don't have a JSON, I have an extension called the JSON formatter. You can just Google, type Chrome extension JSON formatter. It'll come parse like this. And so I highly, this is just straight up text, but sometimes it'll come back as one long string, so you can't collapse it. I really like this plugin. It's a great one. But basically what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and pass in this name property from the object. But first we have to get the service so that we can actually do the AJAX calls. Let's go ahead and create our service. We're going to create it just like how we did our component, if you remember earlier, where we can do ng generate service. And what are we going to call it? Well, in this case, I think we're just going to call it our crypto service. Wham bam, cool. So you'll see that we have created a crypto service. It added here. Now we're not going to be talking too much about good file structure and folder structures. There's just no time. But typically I would have my own. I would have a every one of my components would have their own folder, and a service would have its own folder, model would have its own folder, pipes would have its own folder, so on and so forth. But for the sake of this video and time, we're just going to go ahead and not worry about that. So you'll notice that when we create a service, a couple things happen. One, it creates a test application here for us to test the service. We're not going to worry about that again. And then it creates our service. You'll notice here that we have this @injectable. This allows us to create a service at the end of the day. Similar how we have to pass in the metadata with the @component, the @injectable is for services. That's going on here. And you'll also notice that now, oh, it didn't add it. I thought it was going to add it. So we have to add the crypto service in order for us to use it in other applications here. To the application. So we're going to import what did it end up being? Crypto service. If that isn't a bad name, I don't know what is. So let's go ahead and just drop off that last service real quick. Crypto service. I probably should have named it crypto service. So from, what are we going to name it? Right here. Just pass that in. Cool. So now that we have it imported, we have to add it to our ng model though. Importing it here without adding it to the ng model does nothing. Services get added to the providers. Now our applications will have access to our service. So how do we make an AJAX call from our service though? Because that's our end goal, right? That's what we're trying to accomplish. Okay, so as of Angular 5, the HTTP module slightly changed, and so we're going to import in our service the HTTP client, and that's going to be from @angular/common/HTTP. Now, one thing to be able to use this is we actually have to import the HTTP module in our app module here so that we have access to this, essentially. All right, so in our component, in our module, we're going to import the HTTP client module from the same place that we just did a moment ago for HTTP client. Now this is going to be @angular/common/HTTP. And then now that we've imported it, we have to go to our imports here and just let it know that we plan on using it and adding it to our imports. So now that we've done that, we'll have the ability to actually use the HTTP client. Now, when you're doing a service in the constructor, if you're a constructor, basically all you really need to know about this, if you're not familiar with more object-oriented programming, is a constructor essentially, when we create our crypto service, these are the properties that get created along with it, or these are the dependencies that get added to it. And so we're going to create that dependency, and we're just create we can just put HTTP. We're not going to put anything as public or private because I don't want this to confuse anybody. So HTTP of type HTTP client. Now that we've done that, whenever you actually go and use the crypto service, we'll have the ability to go and use the HTTP client module. So how do we go about actually doing an AJAX call? It's pretty straightforward. We're going to create a function in here called get cryptos. And all we want to do here is return this.http.get, and then remember that route I was just telling you about a second ago? We're going to take this route, and we're going to pass this in like so. And then we're going to say, what's the issue it's giving us here? HTTP does not exist on type crypto service. Yes, it does. I think this is just a little bit of the module issue here. Sometimes when you add new modules without restarting your server, you get some little warnings. We'll worry about fixing those warnings later on. So what we're going to return here is what's called an observable. By default, it returns a promise. So the way that we convert our promise to a observable is we just use the concat map. And what we're going to get back from here is a response. Let me go ahead and wrap that. And what we want to do is take that response, and we want to return it back as an observable in JSON form. So now that we've done that, this will allow us, did I spell crypto wrong? C-R-Y, yes. Get cryptos, there we go. To subscribe to that observable in our component and then get that data. Let's go ahead and see what that's going to look like. All right, so how do we add this service to our component? Well, exactly how we added HTTP to our service is now when we jump into our crypto form component.ts in our constructor, we are going to, first we have to import that service. So we're going to import the crypto service from // crypto service, and then we're going to add it as a dependency. In our case, we're just going to call it crypto service, and then of type crypto service. Now, by default, we want it to actually fire off. And that's what this ng on init is. Essentially, when the component loads, it will then fire off whatever code is within here. On init comes from @Angular core, and you can just put implement on init as well as this function name ng on init to make sure that the code gets fired off. So all we're going to do is say this.cryptoservice .get. And of course, make sure you spell crypto service or your IntelliSense will not work. .get cryptos. What is going on here? No, I spelled it right. Okay, cool. .get cryptos. And then what we want to do is we want to subscribe to those cryptos. And this is going to pass back some data. And all we want to do here, for the time being, just make sure we set everything up. Just want to go ahead and console.log that data. Save it, and everything should work, although this is giving me an error. All right, so it looks like it's having some issues detecting our dependencies. What we're going to do is we're actually going to close our server, and then we're going to rebuild it. The reason for this is sometimes when you add new dependencies to modules, create new components, Angular sometimes doesn't know they exist, and I think that's what's happening here. So HTTP does not exist on crypto service. Okay, so my mistake here is we have to actually jump back in here and put this public property on apparently for dependencies. And this will allow us to essentially have access, to our crypto service within it. Otherwise, I think it's assuming it's private, or it's assuming that it's so I didn't want to do any public or private aspects of our application here, but it seems when we do dependency injection, we have to actually add that. And so let's jump back into crypto service and do the same thing. Public, in this case, really only means that, hey, other applications can use it. Even the user can call this if they want to. And so now we'll have access to our application and concat map. And I also made a little mistake here. Concat map, you don't have to do this in the application anymore. You used to have to in the old one, but what we'll have here is just this get call. Go clean up the code a little bit, no big deal. And then jump back into our crypto form component, which now you'll notice, and I'll go ahead and pull this down for this. You'll notice in the chat here, we get our 100 cryptos, and we have access to the whole thing. That's because the reason for that concat map is when we made the change from Angular HTTP to Angular Common HTTP, they convert it from promise to observable for you. And so that's why we're doing that. We no longer have to do that. So that's why that function doesn't exist. All right, the next thing that we're going to do is we have to actually store this data, right? It does no good for us to use it in our template if we can't store it and iterate through it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to create a variable here, and we're just going to call this crypto array. And what this is a property of our component. And crypto array is probably a really bad name, so let's instead call this top 100 cryptos. And we'll just initialize it here, and then in our data, instead of just console logging it, we'll say this dot top 100 cryptos is equal to the data. In a production level application, we would have some models and we'd be creating some classes and maybe an interface. We're not worried about that right now. We're just trying to get the basics down. So we create this property, and this top 100 cryptos, now that we have this, well, we can actually use it in our application. So let's jump into our crypto form component. And what we want, the whole reason we set that up was for this drop down to actually populate with values. And the way that we can iterate through an array is we can use this structural directive here called ng4, which will let us do that. And all we have to do is say, we'll say let crypto. Now that is our element that we're going to be iterating through of top 100 cryptos. That's our array. And then using string interpolation with these curly braces, we can just say crypto dot name. That dot name, of course, comes from the application that that we were looking at, and you'll see here we have our 100 cryptos in order of I believe market share. And while we're at it, let's just add an option here so that it's not going to select the very first value. But now we've set up our service with the Ajax call to do a get call. Everything's working well. Save that. And bam, so we have access to the top 100 cryptos. Very cool. But how do we actually store the data and pass data? And how do we do that? Well, we're going to use a something called ng model. So ng model allows us to create essentially place a two-way binding so that we can change a value in the controller in our component, and we can change values in our template or our view here. And so do that. Let's go ahead and jump into our form component, and we'll just define an object real quick. And we'll just call this crypto survey. And this is going to be equal to an object. And we're going to say name. And by default, we'll set it to an empty string. And again, you'd probably be doing this in class. And then we'll say favorite crypto. We'll set that to an empty string, and then we'll do comments, and we'll set that to an empty string. So we have another property like we have with our top 100 cryptos from earlier, but now we want to be able to target this directly. and change the values. So how do we modify our HTML to do that? Well, on our input here, we can use a ng model and assign it. And what we're going to assign it to is essentially exactly that, which I forgot what the hell the name I just defined it was. Crypto survey. What an appropriate name. .name. So we're going to save that, and you see we get this big scary wall of text. Why did we get that? Well, one, because I first forgot to put name, but we should get, I believe we should get another wall of text. Okay, now we get a less scary but still scary wall of text. Can't bind to ng model since this is a known property of input. All that means is that we actually have to jump into our app module and we have to import the forms module, right? So they're assuming that you're doing some sort of form. If you're using ng model, you're probably working with forms, and they want you to go ahead and import the forms module and add it to your application. And that's going to be from @Angular/forms. Very cool. Take our forms module, throw it in there, save it, and that should solve our issue moving forward. And now we can go ahead and everything works. And you'll notice that if we wanted, for instance, to set name by default to Dylan, we could change it in our application. And you'll see it loads with Dylan. And if we were to change this, it would affect this as well. And one way that we'll show that is when we do our submission. So let's go ahead and delete that, and we'll just go and add ng models to the rest of the application, like so. So add it on the select, and I called that, what did I call that? Favorite crypto. And go ahead and copy that one more time, and then comments. I can remember comments. Where are you? Text area. All right, comments. Cool. So now we've added, we've now connected in both directions our application here. But where does this? We want this form to send us somewhere, right? Really, what we want this to do is we want it to do we want it when we click this to have it call and send some data somewhere. In our case, we're not going to send it anywhere. We're just going to pretend like we are. But how would we do that? Well, we can add this click event here that then calls a function that's called send form and does some stuff. In our case, we're going to go ahead and create a function called send form, and all it's going to do is console.log top 100 cryptos. Cool. And we can see that just the two-way binding is working just fine. So now it's like that. We go ahead and put Dylan. Remember, everything's starting off empty. We'll do Bitcoin, and we'll do like, okay, then I don't know what to put. And then send form, and cool. When we send the form, oh, I didn't mean top 100 cryptos. I meant crypto survey, excuse me. But you did see that it logged out the top 100 cryptos, but that wasn't what I was going for. So Dylan, Bitcoin, send form, and you'll see in our application now that we've actually modified the way that this is going to look. Favorite crypto name. Oh, look, we have a bug in our code. Favorite crypto did not set its value. The reason for it is we didn't set our drop down value, which is why you do these checks, which is pretty straightforward. This is just HTML really at the end of the day. And all we have to do here is jump back to our option. Instead of every value being that, all we want value to be, and we'll just wrap this. When we wrap this like this, what this essentially is doing is now doing property binding, where essentially if we wanted to pass in a boolean, that would be like that, and not, it wouldn't be the string true. And it's the same thing for crypto dot name. This will allow the name to be put in there, not specifically the string crypto dot name. And then you'll see now we go ahead and put something here. Go ahead and put something here, select Bitcoin, submit our form, and bam, now we have Bitcoin in there as we wanted before. All right, so next what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and create routing and see how we can set up our routes in Angular. This is a pretty common property of, or item topic in single page applications. Is a single page because we essentially create these mock routes where we only display certain things if our route or our URL here is in fact a certain path we're not actually reloading the page, we're just changing what's in our view. And so what's going to happen is from name, favorite crypto, comments, and send form, when we click this send form, we want it to then go and change the route. We're still going to have our crypto survey heading there because our router outlet, we're going to add this as our view that changes based on what our route is. So how do we do that? Well, first thing we're going to need to do real quick is go ahead and create a new component. Go ahead and go to your application like so. I should have had this open. My apologies. TLDR -Angular git bash and ng generate component, and in our case we're going to just call it form dash submitted, and that's going to generate a new component for our application. Cool. Here's our component, has all the same stuff that we already talked about. We're not going to worry too much about that right now. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to comment out this app crypto form, and you'll notice that it goes away, right? As we would expect, right? Because we don't have that anymore. So what do we want to do? Well, we need to do some setup. Well, if you haven't noticed by now, Angular works off a lot of different dependencies, and it has this setup. A lot of these ng modules allow us to set up and say what dependencies we're going to use and what part of the library we want to use. Well, we're going to want to import the router module so that we can actually use the routes at Angular/router like so. All right, up next what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create some routes here. I'm just going to create a constant variable called routes, and we're going to set this equal to an array of objects. These are really just going to be our routes that we're going to apply in a second. So you'll see here we're going to have an object. There's going to be a path, which is a string. An empty string is going to be our default path, right? Our home page, if you will. And then we're going to have this component, which is going to take in what component we want in our router outlet, which is essentially a tag that says where we want to inject our view, where we want that to be. So in our case, we have our crypto form component we just defined. So we're going to say, look, when we're on the home page, define this there, and when we're on this other route, in our case, we're just going to call it submitted. We want the component to be our form submitted component. I apologize for the bad naming convention. I'm kind of making up this tutorial as we go along, but we can talk about clean code in a separate video and good naming conventions and things like that. So we have form submitted component. Now, the way that we add our routes and able to use it, well, as we all know, we have to add our module to imports, and then we're going to have this dot for route here, and if you see, then we're going to pass in our routes. So this for route essentially adds our application on the root level. All you have to really know is this is a setup to do routes. That's really all you have to know for what we're trying to get going, or for routes, not for routes. And so now that we've done that, the one last thing that we have to do is instead we just have to create our router-outlet tag and save it like so, and you'll notice that our app crypto form component is now here, and we can go ahead and delete this comment, right? Because we are on the index page, and if we go anywhere else, it's not going to know what that is, and we're going to get an error. There's a couple different ways that we can solve this. One, we could create a 404 component, but we don't need to worry about that right now. That's beyond the scope of this course. But remember we created another route, which is just /submitted. And now you can see our form submitted works, our form submitted component is there, and we're dynamically changing the routes so that it goes and works accordingly. So how do we just link to this and pass? How do we create our routes to go and send to it? Well, it's just an anchor tag at the end of the day, really. So if we go to our crypto form component, we can go to right here, and we're not going to do anything with this send form component. We'll just create a router link on our crypto form template, and we'll just say router link, and what do we want it to equal? In this case, we just want it equal to submitted. And bam, it jumps between everything we want. And we can throw this router link on anything that can be clicked, essentially. Router link can also take in an array of values. So if you're going to have different values, now this would work exactly the same. Just something to keep in mind. So if we click send form, it's going to work the same. That way, if you have parameters or IDs, or you have multiple things, you can concatenate that. But it can take in a string, or it can take in an array. All right, while we're at it, let's just go into our form component and just add some text that makes sense. Something like, you know, we'll just make this an H1, or we'll make this like an H3, and we'll add the text-center class. And we'll just put some something like thank you for your input, exclamation point. We're not going to really worry about too much of making this app look too good, but that's one thing that I can that we can do to get started. All right, so let's jump back into our crypto form component, and we're going to jump into the HTML. We're going to just first off, we're going to display what a pipe is, one of the common pipes that you can use. And so a pipe, just as a reminder, is something that you are going to use to edit data, or to essentially filter how you see data and what it looks like. And a good example of that is the date pipe. So let's create a variable here, and we'll just call it today's date, and we'll set this equal to a new date. Oops, new date. There we go. And we'll jump into our crypto form component and just right at, you know, let's jump back here real quick. And then we'll create a new div here. And in here, we'll have just put a little H5 that is today's date. Again, we're not trying to make this look the best. It's mainly about illustrating an idea. So, crypto form component, today's data. Oh my goodness, today's date. There we go. All right, cool. So you see this very long string, Eastern Daylight Time, all that. That's not very good. What we can use though is some built-in pipes in Angular to actually go and filter this so that we can get it in the form we want without having to manually change it. So the date pipe, we're looking at that documentation right now. You can see that it comes with several formats that you can use as an example. Short is equivalent to month, day, year, hour, minute, and then time zone, all that sort of stuff. And then you have, these are all predefined. But you can see there's a lot of different examples. And it goes on, and there's a lot of documentation. Some other pipes in here to keep in mind. They have the number pipe, which allows us to do decimal places on our numbers. There is the to lowercase and to uppercase pipe, all that sort of stuff. There's also the slice pipe. There's a bunch of pipes, and you can write your own. We'll go ahead and showcase how to write our own real quick after we use the date pipe. So I believe we already have the common module imported here, but all we need to do to use the date pipe, you'll notice we're using these primarily in our HTML. So if we parse by date, you'll see we get the default one, but now we get this very nice added, very nicely filtered default value. Now, if we wanted to do our own custom one, we have this colon that comes. So the pipe, as you might imagine, is denoted by this pipe. And if we wanted to add custom ones, we could do it with a colon. And this essentially tells us, hey, we're about to add in an optional parameter to our pipe here, like so. And we could pass in short. Remember, we had the short. We could also pass in, I believe MM is month, minute, or what is that? Minute? That might be minute. Yeah, that's minute. I think is month, which is the 4th month. For our use, we'll just pass in short, but that's how you pass in optional parameters. Now, let's go ahead and create our own custom pipe. All right, we're going to make a very simple pipe. What we're going to do real quick is just create a drop down here that has a Boolean value of true or Boolean value of false to say, hey, do you like crypto? Or do you believe in crypto? So we'll just do create a little div real quick. Make that a row, a little div dot call dash md dash 12, and a label dot font dash weight dash bold, and we'll love crypto, something like that, and we'll just ask a question. It'll be true or false. Do you love crypto? And ideally, you probably wouldn't use a select tag for this, but we're going to select love crypto, and then in here we'll have option value true, and then we'll have true here for now, and then we'll also have option false, and then we'll have false here for now as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to write a simple pipe that says if it's a true value, if the value is true, go ahead and change it to yes, output it as yes. If the value is false, go ahead and output it to false. All right, so let's start by creating a new pipe. How do we create a pipe? At this point, you can probably guess ng generate pipe, and we're just going to call this bool. Bool yes. Actually, let's call it yes. Yes, no. And it's going to create a new pipe for us. Jump back into our component, form submitted, and then you'll see we have our test file, and then we have our actual pipe. All right, so let's go over what's going on in our pipe here. So you'll see we're importing two things for our pipe. We have pipe transform. This is our decorator, and remember how we did /date? That's what this name is for. In our case, it's going to be yes, no. And then, of course, we're exporting yes, no pipe, and we're implementing pipe transform. What is the transform property coming from pipe? All that is essentially our logic. Hey, when we call this pipe on a value, what do we do with it? And so here we can go ahead and take get rid of all this sort of stuff. Not trying to introduce any TypeScript as much as we can in this introduction video. So what we want to happen here is say, hey, if value, meaning if it's true, return yes. Else, we don't need an else, right? Because it's a return statement. It's not going to hit this unless it's false. Else, go ahead and return no. And so now we've essentially written our first pipe. Let's go ahead and save this other file. And excuse me for having that up. And what we're going to need to do now is we're going to actually need to import that pipe in our modules so that we can use it elsewhere. All right, let's go ahead and fix our, we just have this very nasty little input here. And so let's go ahead and fix that by just adding this class form control, which is again is just a Bootstrap class, form dash control, which will just make it a little bit more pretty. Cool. So what we need to do is jump into our app module and import that pipe. Oh, look, it's already been imported for us. You'll notice that pipes go in declarations as well, just as components do. Let's go ahead and close some of this. And so what we can do here is we'll just do some string interpolation. We'll put the string true here, and then we'll pipe it with yes, no, and then we'll do the same thing with false. So bam, so you'll see our values here are actually, oh, excuse me. So the reason that this is returning yes and yes is not because our pipe is flawed, but because I made a mistake here. So remember, we're expecting a Boolean value, and when they're strings, they are going to always be true. because it's going to be so you'll see yes and no, and the value here is true and false. And so that's a very basic pipe. Pipes are really powerful. I use a pipe that I just call the keys pipe, which essentially, if I have an object, I don't know what the names and the keys are going to be, I'll do the keys and I can have access to all the values in it, and it's really dynamic in that way, something I use quite frequently. So when you're creating pipes and you're really how you want to think about pipes is when you're creating something that's going to affect how it gets rendered in the UI, you might want to think about using a pipe rather than writing some custom logic in the component, and that way you can reuse it in any other components as well. Alright, so I think we're going to stop there for this quick rundown of Angular. There's a lot of other things we can talk about in Angular. Animations, we could talk about sending data from one component to another, and from a parent to a child to a parent. We can talk about how to, inject services and other services. So we can talk about testing. The list can go on and on. Angular's very, very long. So if you're interested in diving a little bit more deeper in it, I have 2 Angular projects. Part 1 is a introduction project, about 3.5 hours of content, where we're going to be building a personal portfolio. We're going to introduce it to a lot of new concepts as well, expand on what we have. And then part 2 is a cryptocurrency project where it's about 8 hours of content or 6 hours of content. I forget what it is. It's about twice the size of the original project. And this goes into even more advanced details. So if you enjoyed this, I appreciate you guys watching the video. Don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, share. I hope it gave you maybe a little bit of a head start, a jump start to get going with Angular 5 and Angular. Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to comment. Milo, I'm trying to do an outro here. Comment, like, subscribe, share, support me on Patreon, hit that notification bell, all that good stuff. I'll see you, and Milo, we'll see you next time. Bye, guys. Here, I just finished my TLDR Angular series. I'm pretty excited about that.
Did you know unibrows were in fashion? Look at this.
No. And even if they are, I will now devote my channel to breaking such a fashion trend. It cannot be allowed to continue.
It's high fashion.
No, they must be high to think that's fashionable, so I understand that. Quick thank to our sponsor, DevicePlus.com. If you guys are interested in Arduino and the Internet of Things, such as Raspberry Pis, might I recommend checking them out at DevicePlus.com. If you click the link in the top corner, it'll take you to a really cool thing. It's an intro beginner level tutorial of how to build a tripwire using Arduino. Check it out.